You know what I was thinking? How on earth could my mailbox color be worth $3,500? That's the ridiculous demand this hoe woman threw at us. My wife, Julie, looked her straight in the eye and said one simple word: number. That was it, just number. And Kayla, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, completely lost it. She actually called the police on us. I was panicking, but the moment the officer showed up and recognized my wife, his face drained of color. "Judge, you live here?" The shock on Kayla's face was priceless, a pure horror, absolute perfection. And trust me, what happened after that is a twist no one could have predicted. Let me set the stage. Our neighborhood is one of those picture-perfect suburban communities. Lawns trimmed like military haircuts, landscaping worth more than some people's annual salaries, and mailboxes that cost as much as a used car. Julie and I had just moved into our $2.5 million dream home. Yeah, I know it's pricey, but software architect money stretches pretty far when you're with the right company. The house had everything: flawless gardens, a 3-car garage, and apparently a broken bar and hoe president who thought she was running her own private empire. I'm Blake Ward, by the way. Since I work from home most days, I get front row seats to all the ridiculous drama in this community. Normally it's petty stuff, a garbage can's being 2 inches off, or endless debates about whether fences should be beige or cream. But nothing prepared me for Kayla storming up to our door like she was leading a SWAT raid. At exactly 7 a.m., she strutted up our driveway in a navy blazer that screamed, "Let me speak to your manager," and clutching a clipboard thick enough to stop a bullet. She rang our bell twice, sharp and commanding, like royalty announcing her presence. I was upstairs pouring coffee when Julie answered. "And here's what you need to know about my wife. Julie Parker has come to the point of legendary. She has the patience of a Zen master, even under pressure." So when I came downstairs and found her standing in the doorway, serene and collected, while Kayla ranted about violations, I knew something interesting was about to unfold. "I'm Kayla Sanders, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association," she declared like she was announcing herself as royalty. "Your property violates 17 separate community standards, and you owe $3,500 in fines." She delivered this with the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no in her life. I stood behind Julie, silently thinking, "Lady, you have no idea what you've just walked into." Julie just smiled at that patient, knowing smile she saves for difficult people. "Could you point out the specific municipal code that authorizes the hoe to impose those penalties?" she asked, calm as ever. I swear, I saw Kayla's eye twitch. Most people would have asked what the violations were or tried to haggle. Not Julie. She went straight for the legal foundation. And Kayla clearly wasn't ready for that. Kayla started rattling off nonsense. $2,000 for unauthorized landscaping changes. Apparently our roses weren't the approved shade of pink. $1,000 because our mailbox was black instead of bronze. And $500 in processing fees because we hadn't asked her personal permission before moving in. As she clutched her clipboard like it was sacred scripture, her voice kept getting more shrill. That's when our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Collins, peeked out her door, barely 90 pounds soaking wet, but with decades in the neighborhood. She caught Julie's eye and whispered, just loud enough for us to hear, "She destroyed the Morgan family with the same tricks. They had to sell their house for half its worth." Then she slipped back inside, but the message was clear. Kayla wasn't new to this. She'd done it before. By then I was frustrated. "Julie," I muttered, trying to stay calm, "just tell her you're a judge. Because here's the thing. My wife is a federal district judge. She spends her days handling criminals and corrupt officials. Oh, nonsense. Shouldn't even register on her radar." But Julie just gave me the look, the one she wears when unraveling a particularly tricky case. "Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes," she whispered. Kayla kept babbling about community standards when Julie fired off another question. "Has this assessment been ratified by a majority vote, in accordance with the Davis-Sterling Act?" I don't know whole law, but I didn't need to. The panic flashing across Kayla's face told me everything. Her confidence cracked, just for a moment. "Well, we follow all the proper procedures," she stammered before regaining composure. "But the point is, these fines must be addressed immediately. You have 48 hours to pay. or we'll escalate to the next level of enforcement." The way she said next level made it sound like she had some secret weapon waiting in the wings. Julie nodded, thoughtful. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Please provide me with the documentation, particularly the sections that grant the HOA authority to impose these penalties." Polite, professional, but beneath that kindness, she was dismantling Kayla piece by piece. Kayla strutted away with smug confidence, tossing over her shoulder, "Most residents fight at first, but in the end, everyone pays. It's easier when people understand their place in the community." Her condescending tone could have cut glass. Julie waited until her heels clicked down the driveway, then quietly shut the door. Without missing a beat, she grabbed her phone and started photographing every inch of the property. The moment Julie began photographing everything, I knew something bigger was unfolding. "My wife doesn't document unless she's building a case." "Honey," I asked, "what exactly are you planning here?" She looked up from her phone, and for just a flicker of a second, there was a spark in her eyes, almost excitement. "Blake, this woman thinks she found another easy target." She Googled our property value, saw the last name Parker, and assumed I was just another housewife she could scare into paying. What she doesn't realize is this isn't just some neighborhood power trip. She's crossing into federal crime, and she just gave me the evidence I need. The calm, methodical way she moved around the kitchen reminded me of every time I'd seen her prepare for a ruling that would change someone's life forever. Then Julie made the phone call that changed everything. "Hi, this is Judge Parker. I need you to pull some files for me." And just like that, my wife was no longer a suburban homeowner dealing with a petty HOA bully. She was a federal judge gearing up for battle. I stood frozen in the kitchen, coffee cooling in my hand, realizing this was the opening shot of a war Kayla Sanders had no idea she just started. 3 days later, Kayla returned, and this time, she brought reinforcements. She arrived like she was leading a full-scale operation, a briefcase in hand, a hired contractor trailing behind her, and that same smug walk like she'd practiced the performance a dozen times. The fee had magically ballooned from $3,500 to $8,000 overnight. Kayla's math seemed simple. Threaten someone on Monday, double the extortion by Thursday. "Mrs. Parker," she declared, planting herself on our porch like a judge about to deliver a sentence, "your continued non-compliance has escalated this matter significantly." She handed Julie a document dressed up to look official, a fancy letterhead, legal-sounding phrases, random signatures, the kind of paperwork that would scare most homeowners into cutting a check. "The board has voted to impose additional penalties," she announced smugly. $2,000 in late fees, $1,500 in attorney consultation costs, and $1,000 in lien preparation charges. I leaned against the doorway, watching Julie's face. Her expression shifted into that focused look I'd seen countless times in court. Like a cat about to pounce on a mouse, she examined Kayla's forged documentation with the same precision she used to take down real criminals. "This is fascinating," Julie said calmly, and I instantly recognized that tone. That was the voice she used right before dismantling someone's entire argument in court. "Could you explain exactly which Davis Sterling provisions authorize these penalties?" she asked. Most people would have begged for a payment plan. Not Julie. She went straight for the non-existent legal foundation. That's when our neighbor Tom Rodriguez appeared, and his timing couldn't have been better. Tom, who lived 3 houses down, carried the same honest look as his younger brother, Officer Rodriguez, and as we'd soon find out, that connection would matter a lot. Tom had been watching Kayla's antics as a board member, quietly keeping records and waiting for someone brave enough to fight back. "Kayla," he said, voice sharp with years of pent-up frustration, "I don't remember the board voting on these penalties. In fact, I don't recall a board meeting at all this week." He folded his arms, and Kayla's carefully rehearsed performance started to crack. "And since when do we impose late fees without a proper notice period?" he added. The change on Kayla's face was immediate, a predatory confidence melting into panic. For the first time, she wasn't facing another intimidated homeowner. She was up against an insider who could blow holes in her scam on the spot. But Julie wasn't done. She was just setting her trap. "I'd like to request a formal HOA board meeting to discuss my payment options," Julie said, sounding perfectly polite, like any reasonable resident. But in reality, she was cornering Kayla into a public forum where her lies would unravel in front of the entire board. The bylaws require 7 days notice for all homeowners, correct? Watching Kayla unravel was like flipping a switch. Her fake authority crumbled instantly. She stammered, clutching her briefcase like it held state secrets. That won't be necessary. These matters are usually handled privately between the association and the property owner. Translation: please don't make me defend my fake fees in front of people who know I'm lying. But Julie just smiled. I insist. As a new resident, I want to fully understand the community standards. I'm sure our neighbors would benefit from seeing exactly how these assessments are determined. Kayla couldn't refuse without revealing herself as a fraud. That Saturday, the board meeting was held in the community center. And friends, it was like watching a masterclass in legal strategy. Julie walked in with a folder so thorough it could have been a law student's final thesis, and not just the HOA bylaws, but state housing statutes, federal regulations, and precedents to match. Julie walked into the community center meeting carrying a folder so thorough it looked like a law school thesis of bylaws, state housing regulations, and even case law from similar disputes. Kayla marched in with her usual false confidence and a pile of paperwork she clearly thought would intimidate everyone. She had no idea it was about to be shredded by preparation far superior to her own. Before we talk about my so-called assessment, Julie began, her voice carrying that unmistakable courtroom weight, I need to clarify some procedural issues. Then she fired off the kind of questions that make honest attorneys nod in approval and fraudsters sweat through their clothes. Has this fine structure been ratified under Civil Code Section 1440? Are these penalties aligned with the graduated enforcement process outlined in the covenants and restrictions? And most importantly, does this board even have the legal authority to impose liens without meeting statutory notice requirements? From my seat in the back, I watched my wife dismantle Kayla's entire scheme with nothing but calm questions and flawless legal reasoning. Tom Rodriguez stepped in with insider details about shady board practices. 2 other board members started questioning fines they rubber-stamped without fully understanding. Kayla's face told the story. She was realizing that the easy mark she targeted was in fact a seasoned legal strategist who'd done more research in a week than Kayla had done in her entire career of scamming. By the time the meeting adjourned, the board had voted to freeze all assessments until a full review of enforcement procedures could be completed. Julie had claimed victory in Rondonia without ever revealing she was a federal judge. She beat Kayla strictly with knowledge, preparation, and strategy. As we walked back to our car, I finally asked the question that had been eating at me. Julie, why are you dragging this out? You could shut her down in 5 minutes by flashing your credentials. She stopped, glanced back at the community center where Kayla was locked in a furious argument with her contractor sidekick, and answered with that steel edge in her voice, yeah, the one I've only heard when she talks about injustice. This isn't just about us. Kayla has been running this con for years. She preys on newcomers, especially families who look different or vulnerable. She's destroyed lives, forced people out of their homes, stolen hundreds of thousands through fear and phony threats. If I scare her off now, she'll just wait until we move and start over with someone else. That's when I realized my wife wasn't just protecting USA, she was building a federal case to end Kayla's racket permanently. Every inflated fee, every bogus violation, every abuse of procedure was being recorded by someone who knew exactly how to turn the whole fraud into federal charges. When we reached our car, I spotted something that chilled me. A man in jeans and a baseball cap leaned casually near Kayla's SUV, talking to her in low tones while scanning the parking lot with sharp, practiced eyes. He moved like someone trained to anticipate threats. Kayla wasn't just turning up the financial heat here, she was bringing in muscle. Julie noticed him too. I watched her expression change from satisfaction to calculation. Things are about to get more interesting, she murmured, almost with anticipation. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the dread that this was no longer just neighborhood drama. Kayla's desperation was about to make things far more dangerous. Monday morning confirmed it. From my office, I overheard Julie in her study, speaking in that formal voice she uses when the stakes are serious. The caller on the other end was loud enough that I caught fragments. Ma'am, What you've uncovered goes far beyond HOA violations. We're talking about systematic targeting of vulnerable homeowners." Julie's face went pale, her hand clenched the phone tighter. When she hung up, she sat in silence for a moment before turning to me with a look that was equal parts professional excitement and real fear. "Blake, the state investigators just confirmed it. Kayla's not running some petty scam. She's part of a network defrauding families across 3 counties." The scope hit me like a punch. This wasn't just about mailbox colors anymore. It was organized crime, complete with corrupt city inspectors inventing building code violations, crooked contractors inflating costs, and dirty cops intimidating victims into paying up. And sure enough, by Tuesday afternoon, Kayla escalated again. This time, the fees had ballooned to $20,000, $5,000 for fabricated municipal violations, $4,000 in bogus expedited processing fees, and another $3,000 for so-called enforcement costs. But money wasn't the scariest part. What shook me was the man standing beside her, Detective Morrison. The moment I saw him, I knew this wasn't just a rogue HOA president anymore. This was organized crime backed by law enforcement. Morrison carried himself exactly like what he was, a cop who had sold his badge, gambling debts, bribes, whatever the reason. He was dirty, and now he was Kayla's enforcer. "Mrs. Parker," he said smoothly, standing on our porch as if he owned it, "we've received reports of harassment directed at community officials. Some residents are concerned this may escalate." The way he said escalate wasn't a warning. It was a threat. "Comply, or he'd manufacture charges to crush us." That's when I saw Julie's demeanor change. A calm suburban wife gone, federal prosecutor in full control taking her place. Julie dismantled Morrison's threats like a surgeon working with a scalpel. "Detective Morrison," she began coolly, "I'm curious what statute gives your department jurisdiction over civil HOA disputes? Which law are you citing in this alleged investigation of a harassment between neighbors?" She was treating him like a hostile witness in court, and the realization was dawning on him that this wasn't a frightened homeowner he could intimidate. This was someone who knew the law better than he did. And Julie wasn't done. She leaned in with precision. "I'm also very curious about your internal affairs file. Case number II-202347, the one involving unauthorized use of department resources for personal gain." The blood drained from Morrison's face. Not pale ghostly white. How could a suburban housewife possibly know about a sealed internal affairs investigation? Why was she throwing specific case numbers at him as if she had access to classified law enforcement files? While Morrison stumbled in shock, Julie was already laying the foundation for her broader counterattack. She filed formal complaints with the State HOA Oversight Board and the city's Ethics Commission, ensuring there would be official records forcing an inquiry into Kayla's whole operation. But the real genius was how she turned the neighborhood against Kayla. She started connecting with residents who'd been too afraid to speak until now. Mrs. Collins came forward first, handing over 2 years' worth of detailed notes. Every bogus violation, every inflated fee, every threat used to bully elderly residents. Tom Rodriguez, still serving on the board, revealed financial discrepancies and procedural violations that pointed directly to systematic embezzlement of HOA funds. And suddenly, the community shifted. What had been a street full of fearful families peeking through blinds was transforming into organized resistance. 3 more neighbors stepped forward with their own stories of fines invented out of thin air, threats of liens, and one horrifying case where Kayla fabricated a sewage emergency that forced a family to sell their home at half its value. Our dining table turned into Julie's war room. Legal codes, sworn statements, and financial documents were spread out like evidence in a federal trial. "Blake," she said, her voice sharpened with that mix of outrage and resolve I'd heard in courtrooms. "This network has stolen more than $400,000 from families who thought they were just being hassled by strict HOA rules. Kayla targets newcomers, especially minorities and young professionals unfamiliar with the local system. They're the most likely to pay instead of fighting." That evening, Julie finally revealed the ace she'd been holding. "I've been in contact with federal investigators for months. They've been tracking this corruption network. What they needed was someone with the legal background to document the full scope. When Kayla came after us, She handed the FBI exactly what they needed for a RICO case. And Morrison, his panic wasn't just about his gambling debts or helping Kayla shake down residents. Julie had uncovered far worse: falsified police reports to justify illegal property seizures, using his badge to intimidate federal crime victims, and providing cover for Kayla's racketeering. These weren't minor offenses, these were felonies with decades of prison time attached. And Julie had been documenting his role since the day they met. By Wednesday, the scope widened again. State investigators called with findings that even rattled Julie. Morrison wasn't just Kayla's enforcer. He was a linchpin in the network of fabricating police reports to enable foreclosures, intimidating witnesses into silence, and legitimizing stolen property transfers that funded the entire operation. When Julie hung up, she turned to me, her expression grim. "Blake, this just escalated. Morrison isn't some dirty cop on the take. He's a key player in a criminal enterprise that's been dismantling families for years. The charges he's facing could lock him up for decades, and that makes him desperate enough to do anything." That night, I watched Julie prepare for what she already knew was coming: Kayla's final, most reckless move. Julie had predicted it from the beginning. Cornered criminals always lash out harder when they realize they're up against superior legal firepower backed by federal investigators. The pieces were set, the evidence was airtight, and the endgame was about to begin. The files Julie had pulled together could have taken down an entire crime syndicate. Financial ledgers showing embezzlement, recorded conversations proving conspiracy, stacks of falsified violations used to justify property seizures, and sworn testimony from dozens of victims who had finally found the courage to speak. "Tomorrow, everything shifts," Julie said, scanning the case files with the confidence of a prosecutor who knew her case was airtight. "Kayla's going to make her last mistake. And when she does, Officer Rodriguez will trigger the federal takedown that shuts this enterprise down for good." As we readied for bed, I realized my wife hadn't been fighting a neighborhood dispute, how she'd been quietly building the legal foundation for sweeping federal prosecutions. Every arrogant move Kayla had made, every escalation, was now evidence that could bury the entire operation for decades. Then the state investigators called Julie back with news that made her face go pale. "Ma'am," the voice said, "what you've uncovered a broken bar. This goes far beyond HOA fraud." I couldn't hear the rest, but whatever was said rattled Julia, something big enough to spook even a federal judge. The outcome of tomorrow's confrontation would determine whether Kayla's empire collapsed or whether it exploded into something darker than any of us had imagined. Detective Morrison's panicked retrieve should have been a red flag for Kayla. But desperate people don't think clearly. The very next day, he was back. Only this time, he had reinforcements and a dangerous edge in his demeanor. Kayla had clearly cornered him. Either make this problem vanish or answer to the powerful people funding her scheme. Morrison showed up on our porch with a younger officer in tow, his tone dripping with forced authority. "Mrs. Parker," he declared, "we've received complaints about harassment and intimidation directed at HOA officials. There's concern your resistance to community standards could escalate into a broken bar, something more serious." The way he said something more serious was nothing short of a threat. But my wife had stared down far worse in federal courtrooms. Morrison didn't intimidate her, he barely even ranked on the scale of danger she'd faced. Julie stepped outside with the poise of someone holding all the cards. "Detective Morrison, I do appreciate your concern for community safety," she said in that deliberate, measured tone I'd learned to recognize, the one she used right before dismantling someone's entire case. "But I have a question. Under what statute does your department have authority to enforce civil HOA disputes? And more importantly, how exactly does requesting proper documentation qualify as harassment?" The rookie officer shifted uncomfortably, fumbling for a response. Morrison silenced him with a glare sharp enough to cut glass. The younger man wisely retreated into his notepad, leaving Morrison to fight a battle he was already losing. "Look, Mrs. Parker," Morrison growled, his official mask slipping, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Pay the fines, follow the rules, and everyone goes back to their normal lives. Keep fighting, and things get a broken bar complicated." And that's when my wife did the thing that made me fall for her all over again. She smiled. Not the polite smile she'd worn with Kayla, but the sharp, predatory grin I'd seen her unleash on corrupt defendants who thought they could outsmart federal law. "Detective," she said smoothly, "are you familiar with U.S. Code Title 18, Section 1962? It covers civil rights violations committed under color of law. Specifically, it applies to officers who abuse their authority to further criminal enterprises." The color drained from Morrison's face instantly. He wasn't just uncomfortably, he looked like his soul had been yanked out. The rookie blinked between them, suddenly realizing this wasn't some neighborhood spat. This was way above his pay grade. I stood behind Julie, watching her dismantle a corrupt cop with nothing but flawless legal knowledge and impeccable timing. "A broken bar. I think there's been a misunderstanding," Morrison stammered, already backpedaling toward his patrol car. "We're just conducting a routine welfare check. No problems here." He practically dragged his bewildered partner down the driveway, eager to escape before Julie could drop another legal hammer. As their cruiser disappeared, I finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at me. "Julie, a broken bar. How do you know so much about Morrison's case file? How do you even have access to sealed internal affairs records?" She took my hand, guided me back inside, and closed the door with a sense of finality that told me a reckoning was coming. "Blake," she said softly, "I haven't been completely honest about why I'm taking Kayla's case so seriously." My chest tightened. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "The FBI has been tracking this corruption network for 8 months, she confessed. "Kayla's scam isn't just about HOA fines. It's part of a larger web of public corruption. As city officials, building inspectors, law enforcement officers across 3 counties, the Bureau has been waiting for the right case to bring it all to light, and they needed someone with the legal knowledge and credibility to document it properly." I sank into a chair, realizing just how deep we were in. I sat heavily in my kitchen chair, struggling to absorb what Julie had just revealed. "So when you said you wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole goes, a broken bar," I started. "I meant I was already part of the FBI's investigation," she confirmed. "Not officially. I am not undercover, but as a federal judge who just happened to move into the right neighborhood at the perfect time, when Kayla came after us." She practically handed the Bureau everything they needed to build a RICO case. Before I could even process that, the phone rang. Julie's expression lit up with the fierce excitement I'd seen on her during landmark assessment, the kind that reshaped legal precedent. "Judge Parker," she answered, listening intently as she scribbled notes in a shorthand only she could understand. When she hung up, her face carried a mixture of vindication and satisfaction. "Blake," she said, "the state investigators confirmed what we feared. Morrison isn't just backing Kayla's intimidation games. He's been falsifying reports, covering illegal property seizures, and using fabricated charges to justify foreclosure, all while silencing victims who dared to resist." That evening, our home quietly transformed into the neighborhood's headquarters of resistance. Mrs. Collins arrived first, clutching a file she'd been secretly compiling for 2 years. Officer Tom Rodriguez brought evidence of shady transfers from the HOA accounts to shell companies linked to Kayla Circle. 3 more neighbors stepped forward with their own stories: harassment, intimidation, and theft that revealed the network's entire operation. Julie directed it all with surgical precision, as though she were preparing a federal trial, which, of course, she was. The dining room turned into a war room. Evidence boards covered the walls, charts tracked timelines, and the table groaned under stacks of documents strong enough to bring down an empire. "Here's how this plays out," Julie told us, her tone crisp and authoritative. "Kayla's empire runs on fear and the belief that victims won't fight back. They've never been challenged with organized resistance, meticulous documentation, or someone with the legal expertise to dismantle their strategy. Tomorrow, that changes." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Parker needs to understand that some problems require permanent solutions. Pay tomorrow or face consequences." I showed it to Julie, expecting alarm. Instead, that sharp, predatory smile returned. "Perfect," she said. "They just escalated from civil fraud to criminal intimidation through electronic threats. That's a federal felony and they've handed us the evidence the FBI needs." She photographed the message, sliding it into her growing mountain of proof. Later that night, I spotted Morrison at the end of our street. He was pacing by his patrol car, speaking into his phone with wild, frantic gestures. Though I couldn't hear his words, I could read his lips. "We have a problem. I think she knows about the other thing." The other thing, whatever it was, it scared a corrupt cop into panic and left my wife via a federal judge ear shaking as she deleted something from her phone with trembling hands. By dawn, the tension was suffocating. Friday arrived with the heaviness of a storm waiting to break, and Kayla was about to make the call that would destroy everything she had built. I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to check work emails, when Julie's phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. She gave me a look that said, "This is it," and pressed speaker. Kayla's voice slithered through the room, brimming with arrogance. "Mrs. Parker, I trust you've reconsidered your stance regarding community obligations," she began, almost gloating. "This afternoon, I'll be bringing independent verification of your violations. That will settle this once and for all." Julie leaned back, sipping her coffee, her voice calm. "Independent verification? That does sound impressive." "Care to elaborate?" "Officer Rodriguez will be conducting an official compliance inspection," Kayla announced, as if unveiling a masterstroke. "His report will confirm the need for immediate corrective action. I trust you'll be more cooperative with him than you've been with our prior attempts to resolve this matter." When the call ended, Julie's eyes gleamed with predatory delight. "Blake," she said, her voice electric, "Kayla just made the mistake that will collapse her entire network. She's dragging in a clean copa, one who's about to become the government's star witness." The neighborhood had spent the week quietly preparing for this moment. Once silent residents had shifted into a coordinated force of watchers and witnesses. Mrs. Collins stationed herself on her porch with a clear vantage point. Tom Rodriguez, feigning casualness, washed his car close enough to hear everything. Other neighbors busied themselves in their yards, pretending to garden or rake, while actually positioning to observe and record. Kayla believed she had an audience there to validate her authority. In truth, they were witnesses to the final act of her downfall. Julie, meanwhile, moved with the deliberate focus of a prosecutor preparing for trial. Files were stacked in flawless order, notes double-checked, and somewhere out of sight, FBI surveillance units had already taken position. Tomorrow wasn't going to be another skirmish with the HOA. Tomorrow was the day the trap closed. Julie had gone over everything a final time, ensuring I understood just how much was riding on what was about to unfold. "When Rodriguez gets here, he's expecting a run-of-the-mill neighborhood dispute," she explained, stacking her files neatly. "Kayla will try to parade her phony violations, demand quick compliance, and count on me to crumble in front of a uniform. Instead, what she's going to face is a federal judge who's spent 2 weeks building a rock-solid case that could wipe out her entire operation." It was only then I realized the brilliance of Julie's approach. She hadn't just survived Kayla's schemes, she'd used them to assemble a federal case so complete it could dismantle a criminal empire. Every forged violation, every crooked official, every act of intimidation was carefully logged, lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. By 3 o'clock, the show began. Kayla rolled into the neighborhood in her oversized SUV as if leading a parade. Morrison trailed behind in his patrol car, his face tight with dread, clearly wishing he could be anywhere else. Then came a van stuffed with so-called witnesses, likely Kayla's loyal stooges, ready to swear to lies on command. But while Kayla orchestrated her little circus, the real audience had already taken their positions. Mrs. Collins was on her porch with a notebook and what looked like recording gear. Tom Rodriguez had placed himself in view, acting casual while staying close enough to jump in if needed. Other neighbors, suddenly busy in their yards, had formed a ring of eyes and ears, making it impossible for Kayla to rewrite events later. Morrison scanned the street, visibly unraveling. The man who once wielded fear like a weapon now looked like he was trapped, cornered by the sheer number of witnesses. His crooked confidence had shrunk into a jittery unease. Julie stood at the window, steady and composed, watching the scene unfold like a general who knew the enemy was about to walk into their own trap. "Blake," she murmured, "what's about to happen was sealed the moment Kayla tried to threaten a federal judge. She just doesn't know it yet." Then came the moment that shifted everything. Officer Rodriguez's cruiser turned down our street, and the air snapped with tension. This wasn't just another neighborhood squabble anymore. This was the line where federal law would collide with organized corruption. Victims who'd been ignored for years were finally about to see justice knock on their abuser's door. Julie exhaled slowly, straightening her shoulders. Here we go. Outside, Kayla set herself up like she was the prosecutor at her own trial, a clipboard in hand. Fake witnesses lined up behind her, Morrison skulking with his phony authority. She was radiant with smug certainty, convinced this spectacle would break my wife as it had broken so many before. But Julie wasn't the victim Kayla thought she was. She was the storm that Kayla had just called down on herself. When Rodriguez stepped out of his patrol car, Julie whispered, almost like a prophecy, "The moment he sees me, everything changes forever." I didn't understand how she could be so sure. But looking at her then, calm, resolute, I realized she wasn't guessing as she knew. She knew exactly what his recognition meant, exactly how his presence would shatter Kayla's delusions, and exactly why this confrontation would end everything Kayla had built. And for Kayla Sanders, the next 5 minutes would become the most catastrophic mistake of her criminal career. Kayla pointed toward our home as if it were a rundown shack instead of a pristine $2 million estate with a flawless lawn. Her voice carried with false authority. "This homeowner refuses to comply with community standards." Rodriguez gave a practiced nod, pulling out his notepad like it was just another day on the job. To him, this looked like routine neighborhood drama. Take statements, maybe issue a warning, and wrap it up with advice about getting along with the hoe. He had no idea he was stepping into the climax of a federal sting. "Ma'am, I'll need statements from everyone involved," he said to Kayla before glancing toward our house. "Is the homeowner available to share her side?" That's when Julie opened the front door. She stepped out calmly, coffee mug in hand, dressed like any suburban wife on a quiet Saturday. Morrison smirked from the driveway, convinced this little theater would end as it always did, with another homeowner bullied into submission. Rodriguez walked closer, pad ready, expecting a nervous woman about to buckle under pressure. But instead, he came face to face with someone who would shatter every assumption he had about the situation. The recognition built slowly, like a tremor before an earthquake. At first, he simply looked at her as he prepared to write. Then his pen paused, his brow furrowed, head tilting slightly as if searching his memory, and then his eyes widened. The pieces snapped together. His notepad slipped from his hands, clattering against the concrete. Almost instinctively, he removed his hat in a gesture of respect ingrained from years in courtrooms. His mouth opened, shut, then opened again, words failing him before finally breaking through. His voice cracked. He staggered back, staring at Julie like he'd seen an apparition. "Judge a broken bar, you live here?" The words rang out, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. Julie stood with quiet authority. Kayla, meanwhile, looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Her face twisted through denial, confusion, and outright horror in a matter of seconds. "Judge?" she stammered. "What judge? She's just a homeowner." But Rodriguez found his footing, his training kicking back in. "Ma'am, this is Federal District Judge Julie Parker," he announced firmly. "I've testified in her courtroom dozens of times. She handles major federal prosecutions." Each syllable was another nail in Kayla's coffin. Morrison went pale, looking like his heart might give out. He understood instantly of the threats, the coercion, the whole act if they had been aimed at a federal judge, and with witnesses all around. His career wasn't just over, it was evidence. Julie stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of the bench. "Officer Rodriguez, this situation requires federal attention. I've documented evidence of criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, and civil rights violations under color of law." She handed him a folder mountain of meticulously prepared evidence. "Detective Morrison has used his position to intimidate residents in furtherance of a criminal enterprise. Ms. Sanders has orchestrated a fraud scheme stealing hundreds of thousands across multiple counties." Rodriguez flipped through the documents, his shock hardened into professional resolve. "Your Honor, a broken bar. Should I notify the FBI field office immediately?" Kayla's fully tilde Section 8 shattered. The woman who had strutted in with arrogance was now crumbling. "I didn't know," she shrieked. "I was just enforcing community standards. I didn't know she was important." Her words only dug her hole deeper. She was admitting on the spot that her abuse depended on who she thought was powerless, a textbook civil rights violation. Morrison was already inching backward, eyes darting toward his patrol car, but it was too late. Unmarked vehicles stationed throughout the neighborhood opened, and federal agents stepped out. There was no exit, no cover story, no escape. "Ms. Sanders," Agent Miller declared as he approached, cuffs in hand, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and civil rights violations." His gaze cut to Morrison. "Detective Morrison, you're facing additional charges for civil rights violations under color of law." And just like that, the neighborhood became the stage for the fall of a criminal empire. The streets slowly filled with neighbors who had been peeking from behind curtains, finally stepping outside as Kayla's grip over the community collapsed. Mrs. Collins wiped away tears of relief. Tom Rodriguez documented everything carefully for the record, while three more families of victims of Kayla's scheme gave detailed statements to the federal agents. Julie directed the unfolding operation with the same sharp precision she displayed in court. She had constructed this case from the ground up, transforming Kayla's arrogance and reckless behavior into airtight evidence that would dismantle an entire criminal network and lock it away for decades. As Kayla was led off in handcuffs, her eyes darted back toward our house, her face etched with defeat. It was the look of someone realizing their downfall had come not from a powerful enemy but from failing to do even the simplest research on their intended victims. Rodriguez pulled me aside as the scene bustled around us. "Blake," he said with a mixture of amazement and respect, "your wife just delivered the biggest public corruption case this county has seen in 20 years. The evidence she compiled is flawless. This prosecution is a certainty." Morrison's arrest was a moment I had imagined many times. The officer who once tried to intimidate my wife behind his badge was now facing federal charges for abusing his authority in service of criminal schemes. He stared at Julie in disbelief, still struggling to process how a neighborhood shakedown had turned into a federal takedown that ended both his career and his freedom. If you felt the weight of justice in that moment, when Rodriguez's entire perspective shifted and Kayla's victims finally saw accountability, it was the kind of moment worth saying justice time out loud. As the FBI collected evidence and took statements, Rodriguez leaned in with a look of professional concern mingled with personal curiosity. "There's something else you should know about what your wife's been investigating," he said quietly, his eyes flicking toward Julie, who was coordinating agents like she'd been rehearsing this operation for months. My chest tightened. What else had Julie uncovered, and why did Rodriguez look so serious about telling me? The answer would reveal just how far this conspiracy reached and how Julie had turned what was supposed to be a simple vacation into the year's biggest federal prosecution. The FBI's coordination was seamless, like a perfectly staged performance where everyone understood their part except the criminals caught in the trap. Within minutes of Rodriguez's call, our once quiet suburban street had transformed into the scene of a federal raid. Unmarked vehicles appeared from hidden vantage points. Agents in FBI jackets emerged from surveillance spots they had occupied for weeks. The van that had trailed Kayla earlier was revealed to be an undercover surveillance unit, recording her every move since her fraud had escalated into outright conspiracy. Special Agent Miller, who had been working hand in hand with Julie during the investigation, stepped forward with a look of professional triumph. "Judge Parker, excellent work. You've given us a solid evidentiary foundation. What we have here is enough to prosecute an entire network." Rodriguez drew me aside once more, his voice dropped lower. "Blake, your wife wasn't just tracking Kayla's scam. She's been building a case to dismantle a criminal ring spanning 3 states. Morrison wasn't panicking over nothing. They've been falsifying police reports to justify illegal property seizures, not just here, but in dozens of communities where corrupt officials provided cover for theft." Meanwhile, agents formally arrested Kayla, reading her rights. Her reaction was a portrait of collapse. The smugness evaporated, replaced with frantic panic. "I was just following HOA procedures," she screamed, as if shouting might erase the truth. "I didn't know she was someone important." Her desperation might have been pitiful if not for the years of pain she had inflicted on families robbed of their homes. Morrison's downfall was even sweeter. The same officer who once tried to strong-arm my wife now stood accused of civil rights violations, fraud, conspiracy, and exploiting his badge for criminal purposes. His eyes darted back and forth between Julie and the agents, disbelief etched on his face as he realized the full scope of his ruin. But the most powerful vindication came when past victims arrived to share their stories. The Morganza forced to sell their house after Kayla fabricated sewage violations that produced evidence they had safeguarded for years, waiting for justice. An elderly couple from a nearby neighborhood brought files proving similar harassment that had stolen their retirement home. By the end of the evening, 12 families had stepped forward with testimony, each one strengthening the case and proving the scope of the criminal enterprise. Julie managed it all with the command of a seasoned federal prosecutor. She had, in effect, built a RICO case from scratch, using Kayla's own greed and arrogance as the linchpin for charges that would dismantle the entire operation. Mrs. Sanders, Agent Miller declared formally, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, civil rights violations, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise under federal RICO statutes." And with that, the weight of justice fell. "Mr. Morrison, you are also facing charges for civil rights violations under color of law." Hearing those words was pure music to my ears. Wire fraud alone carries up to 20 years in federal prison. The RICO conspiracy tacked on another potential 20. And civil rights violations under color of law, those are federal felonies with stiff mandatory minimums. Morrison wasn't looking at retirement, he was staring down decades behind bars. Agents swarmed Kayla's home, hauling out boxes of documents, computers, and financial ledgers. Piece by piece, the scale of her scheme was revealed. Shell companies had been set up to buy foreclosed homes. Contractors were roped into kickback arrangements with bloated repair estimates. Bank accounts stuffed with hundreds of thousands of dollars were traced back to families who had been too terrified to fight back. The change in our community was immediate. Mrs. Collins, who had once been too frightened to step outside, was suddenly spearheading a neighborhood watch. Tom Rodriguez was chosen as interim HOA president, tasked with rebuilding the entire association on transparency and fairness. Families who had nearly packed up and left because of Kayla's bullying decided to stay, determined to help create a neighborhood worth living in. But my greatest satisfaction came not from seeing handcuffs, but from watching Julie prove something powerful. She never once abused her authority as a judge. Instead, she built the case using the same tools any determined citizen could access: legal knowledge, patience, and strategy. She didn't win because of her title, she won because she outprepared, outthought, and outlasted Kayla's entire network. That evening, as agents wrapped up outside our home, Julie turned to me. "Blake," she said, "this was never just about us. It was about stopping an enterprise that had been destroying families for years." The irony was almost poetic. Kayla's arrogance and laziness, or her failure to do the simplest research, led her to target the one person in the county who had the expertise, authority, and connections to take her entire empire down. She had practically delivered the evidence into Julie's hands, then doubled down until the case became federal with no escape. 6 months later, justice was official. Kayla pled guilty to racketeering and received 18 years in federal prison. Morrison was sentenced to 12 for conspiracy and civil rights violations. The crooked city officials who had shielded them were themselves indicted. Best of all, restitution from seized assets began flowing to the victims. Families who had been driven from their homes were finally seeing justice. Our once intimidated neighborhood was reborn. Instead of fear and harassment, there was cooperation and community. The HOA shifted from weaponizing rules to actually fostering connection. Property values even rose, thanks to a new reputation, a neighborhood where people protect each other instead of preying on each other. And for me, I discovered that I had married someone who didn't just believe in justice, she was willing to dedicate her own vacation to making sure it happened. Watching my wife calmly and systematically dismantle a criminal organization with nothing but sharp legal skills and patience was better than any Hollywood thriller. Sometimes the good guys really do win, especially when the good guy happens to be a federal judge who refuses to be intimidated by petty criminals with oversized egos. Kayla Sanders had chosen the wrong house, threatened the wrong woman, and learned the hard way that federal justice hits far harder than HOA threats ever could. If this story of justice served cold gave you the same satisfaction it gave me, hit that like button. It helps Anna Drama Nest keep bringing you more unbelievable true stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, where karma comes knocking once again.